and welcome to the Borg Skeptic Show. Tonight we've got a little bit of a change. We did have a guest coming on, but for personal reasons he hasn't been able to show up, so we have Almost Atheist with us tonight, and we're going to be doing a JW live rebuttal of the March broadcasting episode. Hopefully it'll be interesting, and thank you everyone who has joined us in the chat. At the moment we have with us, obviously, Cat the Humanist, regular. We've got Wes Sturdivant, thank you for joining us. Devoutly Secular is with us as well. And Oz, how are you doing tonight, Oz? Thank you for joining us. I'd like to shout out Devoutly Secular before we start. It's a new Roku channel which we are developing between me, Wes, and Justin from the AA Show. And we're hoping to, provide more material for people on TV as well as on YouTube. So stay tuned for more from that channel. So tonight I will bring in our co-host. Let me get the screen ready. There we go. Bring in Jared. How are you doing tonight, Jared?
Hey, how are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. I know it's short notice, so thank you very much for taking a little bit of time out of your night. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you about your podcast, which last time you were on, you said that you were wanting to start that, and I believe you've already got a few episodes pre-recorded.
Yeah, well, I certainly owe you a debt of gratitude because it's funny, when we last spoke about it, I was really just tossing around the idea. And when you brought it up, I said, well, I have to speak on it. And so once I spoke on it, I said, yeah, let me go ahead and do it. And you were kind enough to be a guest. So yeah, I have 3 episodes pre-recorded at the moment, awaiting editing. And each of them excellent in their own way as far as the input from the guests. That, of course, is the focus for me, and being able to hear other people's stories, especially somebody that I know who does not have an XJW background. So therefore, starting to get into different religions, which was one of my goals. So more to come for sure.
Oh, well, we're all looking very much forward to you releasing your first lot of videos. I can imagine they're going to be extremely good. Obviously, I did a guest spot for you on there, and it was a very professional system that you've got going there. And I think you're going to do very well on YouTube and online in general.
That means a lot to me. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so tonight we've got a JW broadcasting rebuttal. It's quite jam-packed, this one. I was watching it earlier on today, and it's all to do with the marriage and how to have a perfect marriage, which in a Jehovah's Witness sense is do as the husband says. It's very misogynistic, and on a whole, the information that they gave, like the advice they gave, would be okay. I would say, it would be good advice that you would get from a marriage counsellor if it wasn't so freaking skewed to one side of the relationship. It's all seems to be on the side of the husband. The husband makes the decisions. The husband needs the respect. The husband is the one that should be looked up to and followed and be subordinated to, and all of that. Which is just a very medieval style of style of advice for a marriage. That's not how you do things in the modern secular world, and it's not how I would say you would create a perfect marriage.
It goes along with the overall. You'll see in these videos that, of course, the man is wearing cream slacks and a polo shirt or a button-up of some type. Polo might actually be an upgrade from the button-ups that you normally see. And then, of course, the woman is wearing a very sensible skirt and some sensible shoes and a blouse that covers everything. And just it's all medieval in that way, but very much 50s as well.
Yeah, it's they are set in the past, and it's and I suppose it goes to show because the amount of problems that Jehovah's Witnesses. I remember when I was in, the amount of problems that Jehovah's Witnesses actually have in their marriages. There's a lot of problems there which just gets hidden under this misogynistic system. And there's very few. It seemed to me anyway. There was very few Jehovah's Witness wives that actually enjoyed their time in the religion. And it's not just at home under the under the headship of the man. And the only time she can pray for the family is by wearing a napkin on her head and all of this bullshit. So there's all that misogyny there. There's also, she can't do anything in the congregation. She has no rights to say anything without a man being present. She has no responsibility. She has no. She just has nothing to do other than slaving away for men her entire life, and it's. So it goes to show, because from what I've seen, there's a lot more ex-Jehovah's Witness women than there is ex-Jehovah's Witness men.
Interesting.
I don't know if that's just what I've seen, but if that actually holds true. But it does seem to be that way, that there's a lot more women that leave than there is men that leave.
Very interesting. Yeah, I think when I remember, so you're talking about marriages that weren't really happy and all that. When I think back to people I knew, I can't necessarily speak on the happiness in the marriage, but I knew elders who were just very. I mean, these are people that are already as powerful as you're likely to get in the organization without going to Bethel and going that whole route. So all this power goes to people's heads at times. And I just remember the way that some of the elders would speak to their wives was very commanding, and basically, you need to listen, you need to obey. The same thing that you'll hear from the governing body speaking to everyone is listen and obey. And frankly, not always even offering the carrot of blessings at the end. Just listen and obey, that's it. So yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's sad though, because when you consider that this is being framed, as you pointed out, as the perfect marriage, or what could be the perfect marriage, and then realize how much happier couples are in what witnesses consider the world. They painted it as though everybody who gets married outside of their religion is going to run into all of these issues, and there's going to be cheating, and et cetera. And what they don't talk about, since it sparked a memory, what they don't talk about is the fact that happens in the organization too. I knew somebody who was a ministerial servant. His wife cheated on him. Nothing's perfect, simply put. But you can be a lot happier when you're not stuck in the vice of subjection.
Yeah, exactly. Jehovah's Witnesses, they always draw on the fact that they don't allow divorces and stuff. And that's in the world you always hear with them speaking from the platform. In the world, the statistics for divorce, look how high these statistics are. Everyone's getting divorced and everything. They can't possibly have happy marriages. Well, maybe not in the marriage that they were in, but the reason they're getting divorced in the world is because they're finding happiness. Mm-hmm. They realise when they aren't happy in a marriage anymore. So you then leave that marriage and go to somewhere where both people are going to be happy. And that's how you do things, properly, because then, at least both people are then happy, and you've got a better environment for your children.
Yeah. Excellent
but
point.
In Jehovah's Witnesses, it's complete opposite. You can't get divorced. Both parents, if you're unhappy, you just got to put up with it. Suck it up and deal with it and move on, which is then causing, problems for the children in that marriage, because the children are picking up on the fighting and the arguments and the sometimes even the beatings, as we've heard before from many people that have left the organisation, how abusive a lot of these marriages can actually be.
Yeah.
But instead of actually having things to fix those abusive relationships, you get told, oh no, you just need to focus on your spiritual health. You just need to, the wife, it's your fault. It's your fault he's beating you. You just need to serve him better.
Exactly.
It's not a way to fix something like that.
Exactly.
Anyway, I think we'll jump into the screen share and we'll watch this appalling display of misogyny from this powerful man in the organisation who's going to tell women how to do things properly and in perfection.
At 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 3, we get a sense, though, of how Jehovah feels about the husband's role. And as we read this together, I want you to imagine Jehovah saying to husbands, yes, you're head of the family, but I want you to know that the head of every man is the Christ, and in turn the head of a woman is the man. Sounds a lot like a father-in-law speaking to the groom. You can marry my daughter, but you better treat her good because you're responsible to me. Well, Jehovah's giving a very clear message for husbands. Jehovah will hold you accountable to him for how you treat your wife. It's something for us husbands to think about, isn't it? Well, what about the role of a wife? Jehovah assigned wives as a beloved partner to her husband. And as partners, they can discuss important family matters and work together to make their marriage a success. Jehovah placed the woman under the headship of the man, and as such, her role is to be in subjection to him. At Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 22, it says, "Let wives be in subjection to their husbands as to the Lord." Subjection. Said a certain way, it almost sounds bad. You have to be in subjection. But is the subjection of a Christian wife to a Christian husband a bad thing? No. See, subjection, as described in the Bible, is not about being subservient. It's about her role in the marriage. You're partners, each with a beautiful role to fulfill. We could illustrate it with watching a couple ice skating. As they move gracefully across the ice, do you think to yourself, how come they never let her hold him over her head? Well, no, you look at him, you look at her, it's obvious who should hold who over their head. Well, just as we admire and respect a woman's role as an ice skating partner, a husband deeply loves and appreciates his wife's role as his partner, as they work gracefully together to make their marriage a success. Well, now that we've briefly reviewed the roles for husbands and wives, let's read together a key scriptural principle at Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 33 that shows how Jehovah wants husbands and wives to fulfill their roles in marriage. Ephesians chapter 5 and verse 33. Each one of you must love his wife as he does himself. On the other hand, the wife should have deep respect for her husband. Well, the obvious message in this scripture is that husbands should love their wives, and wives should respect their husbands. However, there's another way to look at this scripture and learn something about husbands and wives. Jehovah God is telling us what each mate needs. Men need respect, and women need love. Now, this is not to say that men don't need love and women don't need to be respected. However, it does mean that men tend to emphasize respect and status, and women often emphasize intimacy, connection, and love. This perfect principle can help us to understand why our husband or wife may act or feel a certain way. Now, this difference in emphasis affects many areas of married life. Let's consider 3 examples of how this powerful scriptural principle of love and respect can give us insight into how a husband and wife talk to each other, how they solve problems, and how they act in the company of others. Let's consider our first example, how they talk to each other. Now, since a wife's emphasis is on being loved, her conversations often stress friendship and connection when she talks to her husband. She's eager to share the details of her life with him, and in this way become closer to him. She wants him, in turn, to share with her the details of his day in life. Husbands, your wife feels loved when you learn to communicate with her in a way that tells her you truly care about her. She places great emphasis on conversation and sharing her life with you, and likewise you sharing your life with her. For example, a wife tells her husband about something that happened to her that day. He grows impatient with the story and interrupts, or changes the subject, or offers a quick solution. How does she feel? Why can't he listen to the whole story? Has he lost interest in me? It's important that husbands give their wives their full attention as they speak. After a long day at work, his mind may be focused on events that happened to him that day, and he may, without realizing it, feel that the events or conversation of his wife aren't on important subjects. So he may be inclined to play down the events in her life as unimportant or trivial, while events he talks about are substantial and important because they happen to him. Well, such a feeling over time can truly discourage a wife. A husband's disinterest in her stories and events of her life feels a lot like disinterest in her. The advice of Proverbs chapter 20 and verse 5 is good for husbands. It says, "The thoughts of a man's," or we could say in this case, woman's, heart, "are like deep waters, but the discerning man draws them out." That's great advice for husbands. Husbands, when you draw your wife out, let her speak from her heart. That's an indication of great love and affection for your dear wife. Men, on the other hand, often view conversation differently. A husband comes home and his wife asks, "How was your day?" He says, "It was okay, nothing special." But later that night, when they're with a group of friends, he tells a story about what happened at work. And she wonders, well, why didn't he tell me that when I asked about his day? Well, since a man's emphasis is on respect, they often use conversation to establish respect and status with others. A husband may feel that his wife already respects him, so there's no need to tell her the story. Wives, you can encourage your husband to share his life with you by being interested in his work and activities. If you tell him, "Don't talk to me about all that work stuff with me," he won't. And you'll cut yourself off from a part of his life. Show him you're proud of what he does to support the family. Be interested in what happened to him, how he feels about things, or challenges that he overcame. While you may not find his work all that interesting, remember, it is important to him. Let's consider our second example, how they solve problems. Now, I want you to imagine a husband and wife, they're in a car, they're looking for an address, and they're lost. And the wife suggests that they ask someone for directions. She's thinking, why won't he ask? He's thinking, why can't she just let me find it? You see, since the man's emphasis is on respect, he's trying to avoid looking lost to a stranger. The act of asking someone else for directions may make him feel like he's in a lower position. Finding their way is a challenge to him, and he wants to show his wife that he can find it on his own. For the woman, such an idea may not come to mind. She may view it as a simple interchange between them and a stranger. They get help and directions, and they find out where they're going. At 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 33, Jehovah tells us, "But the married man is anxious how he may gain the approval of his wife." Wives, your husband is anxious to have your approval and respect. But on balance, husbands have to be careful that an emphasis on respect doesn't become unreasonable. It won't hurt us to ask for directions or help at times. On the other hand, a wife needs to be careful that she doesn't show impatience by her words or tone as her husband works his way through a problem. A wife who clearly understands her husband's desire to solve problems for the family will understand his actions and will do her part to support him, even in the little things around the home. Now, this support in the little areas of life builds his confidence in her support and can be a major factor in whether a husband takes the lead in larger matters. Our third and final example, how they act in front of others. Have you ever seen a couple where one of them is telling a story and the other is constantly correcting the details? Or the husband is trying to give some direction and the wife corrects or challenges the direction? Or the husband is telling others some unflattering story that hurts his wife's feelings? How can Ephesians 5:33 help a wife in these situations? Well, since a husband's emphasis is on respect, he'll be much more sensitive to comments his wife may make in front of others. It can hurt a husband deeply when his wife openly challenges him in front of others. Proverbs chapter 31 and verse 12 has this advice for wives. She rewards him with good, not bad, all the days of her life. So when in public, or when others are around, even close family and children, try not to openly disagree with him, correct him, or attempt to take over what he's doing. How you speak to your husband in front of others is a great way to show your deep respect for him. It also builds respect for him and others, including any children in the family. Well, how can Ephesians 5:33 help a husband act in front of others? Well, when in public, husbands will want to act like the husband in Proverbs chapter 31 and verse 28. It says, her husband rises up and praises her. It's common today for husbands to make fun of or even say demeaning things about their wives. But since a wife places so much emphasis on connection and friendship, she can really be hurt when demeaning remarks are said to get a laugh. It makes her feel awful. Husbands, your wife considers you her best friend, the one she shares everything with. If you break that trust, she feels unloved and hurt. Now, the best time to bring matters to each other's attention is when you're in private, or if needed, when you can talk in such a way that others cannot hear what's being said. In this way, a wife shows deep respect for her husband, and the husband shows his love for his wife. So in review, we've considered just 3 situations that the principle of love and respect can help us to have a successful marriage. How a husband and wife talk to each other, how they solve problems, and how they act in the company of others. A good marriage is hard work. How is your marriage? Would you say that you've developed good patterns or bad patterns in dealing with each other? When was the last time you talked as a couple about love and respect for each other? Jehovah's perfect advice at Ephesians 5:33 can help the marriage of two imperfect people. In just a few words in this verse, Jehovah's sharing with us a key principle of how he designed marriage. He's telling us what each needs and places emphasis on. Husbands put emphasis on being respected, and wives put emphasis on being loved. And this principle forms a key part of the divine pattern for marriage. If you want your marriage to operate,
Yeah, so that was just that was just sickening in my opinion. I mean, just how blatant the misogyny was there. It was just. I even said it at one point, didn't he? Wives be subordinate. Now, it may sound like being subordinate is a bad thing, but is it? No. Well, of course it is. What the fuck? No, but I mean, he's talking about marriage as being a partnership, and then talking about wives needing to be subordinate to the husbands. Well, I'm sorry, if you look up the definition of, a partnership, it's equality. It's 50-50, split down the middle. It's not, 90% the man, 10% the woman, which is what we've just seen here. She's not allowed to, she has to respect him. She's not allowed to over-talk him in public. She has to, pick the times when she's going to actually speak to him, in case she pisses him off in any way. If there's any problems in the marriage, it's clearly her fault. If he's not listening to her, then she must have. She must have told him at some point, or given him the impression not to talk to her. It's so lopsided in one way. It's just bloody ridiculous.
I have a lot to say to this, but first and foremost, it just occurred to me after some of the posts that I saw on social media today, and the fact that this was what they chose for the March JW broadcast episode, that today is International Women's Day.
Oh, is it?
And for whenever, I don't know when witnesses would normally be watching this. I don't know if they watch it as soon as it comes out, and there's probably people who are just waiting for the push notification or whatever they get for it. But it just occurred to me, it's almost an answer to International Women's Day, isn't it? Yeah, it's almost an answer to the idea that women are free to make their own decisions. And coming back to your point about subjection, so I'm big on definitions of words. And words matter. There's always other words that you could use. So I'm going to point out the synonyms, but I say that in preface that synonyms obviously are not the exact same. So I don't want to dwell on that over much. But the definition of subjection, and I quote from Merriam-Webster, the act or process of bringing someone or something under one's control. Yeah. So the definition as it relates to witnesses, they're not thinking, I'll put it this way, if I were to rephrase it, if that man would have instead said, women, you should let your husbands control you, it wouldn't have flown over or gone over nearly as well. That wouldn't fly, right? But when you say, oh, well, you're be in subjection, well, that's what the Bible says, right? So they get to use that quote. But in reality, what it really means when you look up what the word is, what the definition is, it means you're letting them control you. That doesn't sound good at all, does it? Who wants to be controlled? Who says, oh, I want my husband or anyone else for that matter to control me? No one does. And the synonyms, I wanted to at least reference them because I find them amusing for the point I'm making. Domination, overpowering, subduing, subjugating. None of these are good things. Who says, oh yeah, I want to be overpowered in my marriage. I want to be subjugated in my marriage. No one says that, because that's not what people actually want, and that's not just 2021. That's psychology.
Yeah.
So, and of course, I'm no psychologist, but I've read enough about it that no one's. I don't think anyone's clamoring to be overpowered by people. I'm pretty sure that's what we're trying to avoid. So a lot of things wrong with what was said, but also we got to talk about those examples they used. I'm curious what you thought about the ice skating.
Oh, that was absolutely abysmal. I mean, it's clear. It clearly to me, it's they're using they do it all the time as well in these videos. Is they pick an analogy, they show an image that or a video that they think is supporting their point, and then they basically put that on and then go, look, see, what we're saying is correct. It makes sense because it works in this scenario. But the problem with this analogy is it doesn't bloody work. I mean, there's 2 points to this, which is, one, this analogy is not talking about a marriage or anything remotely related to a marriage. This is a partnership between 2 sportsmen.
Exactly.
And the relationship that they have enabled to be able to do that sport. And secondly, it doesn't work even in that scenario because there's many times in ice skating that the woman will actually pick up the man. It's I believe it's called the reverse lift. Where the woman actually carries the man. So it doesn't work. But if you take the analogy further though with the ice skating, it is a partnership. They're equal. The man isn't in control of the woman in that scenario. She has to do just as much as what the man has to do in that in the ice skating scenario. Whereas the burden on women in a Jehovah's Witness marriage is way more weighted towards women. Women have to do so much more. They have to clean the house. They have to, cook all of the meals. They have to support the man in every decision that he makes. She's not allowed to make a decision. She has to be careful when she says things, and what she's saying isn't disrespecting the husband, and especially when she's in public, like we were talking about at the end. When you're in public, you're not allowed to talk at all, basically, unless your husband says that you are allowed to speak, and it's absolute bullshit. Whereas you think about what the man has to do in the relationship, he basically has to do nothing. He has to show her love every now and then. Take her, as we're going to see in later videos, take her out for a meal once a month or something. If she says, "Oh, we can't afford this item that you want to buy," you don't have to listen to her, but you've got to think about what she said. It's not the same, is it? The burden that's involved in that.
Well, and something that's interesting about that too is, in point of fact, the way they're putting all this authority on men, that's a burden on its own. Having to, so for example, before I was disassociated, the one of the elders who I actually liked very much, especially when I was a witness, and still respect, because even after. I won't go into the long story because it would be a long story, but even after I got disassociated, that night that the announcement came through, he called me and said, "Hey, I just wanted to say goodbye, and I'll always be thinking about you." And I was really impressed by that because that's more than what my own family did. But the reason I'm bringing him up is because he's a family man. He has 3 kids, and I could see over the years the burden of him having to make decisions for his whole family. And being an elder, constantly giving talks, constantly having to lead field service, all these other things that they layer up on you. And so it's really sad that the idea is, well, the man has to have all of this, because not only are you taking away from women their rightful share of being able to have a say in the decisions that are made and all of that, but then it's putting all of that on the man, which they're not designed to handle either. It should be a partnership. And when it's either, if it's not going to be 50-50, if it's 75-25, clearly no one's actually benefiting from that. One person has too much, the other person has too little. And that reminds me of this podcast. So there's a motivational speaker by the name of Simon Sinek. Excellent man. And he talked about how everybody wants an equal relationship. Well, it's not necessarily about equality in all ways, because equality from a certain perspective means I cook dinner and then you cook dinner. I do the dishes and then you do the dishes. But what is very desirable is an equitable relationship, meaning I cook dinner, you do the dishes. In other words, you're both bringing things to the table. It doesn't have to be tit for tat on every single thing. You don't keep a list of what each person is doing. You just know that you're both contributing, and so you're making each other whole through that. And so that's something that came to mind as we were watching that video, because I think that's something that's clearly missing. It's not equitable. There are extremely clearly defined roles, and if you step out of line, you're going to get smacked for it.
Yeah. And it's those roles that I have a biggest problem with within this scenario, because as you say, you could split a lot more equitably throughout the marriage, but the way that they've designed these roles, yes, the man is taking a lot. He's got all of the decisions, and then obviously he's got the burden of those decisions, like you were mentioning, which is not fair on him, but it's also not fair on her, because she's not allowed to support him properly. Her ability to support him by taking on some of that stress isn't there, because she's not allowed to overspeak him. She's not allowed to. She's got to be careful that she's showing patience, and got to be careful with what she's saying to him and how she's phrasing things and things like this, which is taking away her ability to then support him properly. Because she's always got this extra thought in the back of her head that, maybe what I'm going to say is going to get me a smack around the frickin' teeth, if he doesn't like what I'm saying, which happens a lot of times in a lot of these marriages that are set out exactly like this. Is, the man's got a lot of stress because he's got a lot of power, but with that power, he also doesn't have to worry so much about how he's treating her. He can... if he does get angry, he can release on her, as long as he does it in private. That's sort of the message that they put across in Jehovah's Witnesses. Is as long as the abuse is happening in private, then that's okay. As long as it's not happening in public, because we don't want to bring reproach upon Jehovah's name or anything, which is the age-old argument that they use all the time.
Absolutely. And also, and you touched on it, but abuse isn't just physical all the time. Emotional abuse can be extremely powerful as well. And just the simple, words can hurt, words can cut. And so if the wife speaks up out of turn, I hate even saying that, but, speaks up out of turn, and the husband decides to reprove her later, which he's well within his scriptural right to do, according to witnesses, then just the way that he might say things, and that's what I was referencing earlier, the way that these elders would speak to their wives would be, borderline like, shut up, and even just something as simple as that phrase. I think, it's not profane, and yet if somebody were to tell us, shut up, that can still be damaging. Imagine in a loving relationship, or what's supposed to be a loving relationship, even a phrase like that, not allowing somebody to speak their opinion when they wish to, that on its own can be damaging. And of course, that would be light work compared to what a lot of the things that I've heard, the things that have been said.
Yeah.
Even getting into cussing each other out, which isn't healthy around the it doesn't matter whether you're a witness or not. It's not healthy.
Exactly, and the emotional control is one of the strong control points that Jehovah's Witnesses do use, and you see it throughout. We've covered quite a lot on this channel Where they're actually using emotional control, and it's in every aspect of your life as a Jehovah's Witness. Whether you're a sister, whether you're a brother, whether you're, elderly, or whether you're, a child within the organisation. It's all about controlling what you're able to think, what you're able to feel, and and that it is the foundation of religious trauma syndrome. Over long periods of time. For us, we were in for 18 to 20 years. That's a long time. But there's people who've been in that organisation for 30, 40, 50 years. And, it may have become normal to them, that sort of way of life. But deep down, they are damaged people. They are victims of this organisation. To the point where, me and you, and our viewers here will, be watching what we've just watched, and they'll be, wanting to puke at what they're seeing there. The level of misogyny that we can see. But Jehovah's Witnesses sat watching this will look at it and be like, oh yeah, maybe I need to change a little bit in my marriage, because my marriage isn't as perfect as what they're putting out here for us. And they're making good points there. We'll change things up. And you'll have wives in the audience who are like, last week I spoke out of turn to my husband. From now on I'm going to shut up a little bit more and try to be more respectful and thing. And at the very end of the video that we just saw, did you notice the guilt trip that they did, where they were like, now look at your own marriages. Do you have a perfect marriage? Mm-hmm. Is there anything in your marriage that you think maybe you may be able to change to be? So there's people in the audience who'll be listening to that, and they'll have perfectly good marriages. They'll have never asked the questions that he's asking because they never needed to.
Yeah.
But then, because they never asked those questions, and he's saying, "Did you ask these questions?" They'll look at that and go, "Oh well, our marriage clearly isn't perfect. We need to change it now." Mm-hmm. And slowly and slowly, more marriages will become abusive.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if nothing else, it's instilling in everyone even more the feeling that they're not good enough. Because I remember when I would hear those things, obviously not on the marriage topic when I was young, but when I would hear similar things where they'd ask, are you doing the most that you can? Are you praying every day? Incessantly, then it gives you the idea that you're not doing enough, and then the voice in your head starts to tell you that too, at least in my experience. I can attest to, as a third party, I can attest to some of these things that we're talking about as far as abuse, because I know that, witnesses, if they were to hear that, would say, that's not at all. Jehovah's loving, and the organization is loving, and we love each other, and they'll, march out all of these different excuses. But my family history is very, very sad when it comes to marriage. And my uncle was, mind you, so I should preface this by saying my uncle's always been a witness. He was raised as a witness in the religion. I won't say in the truth, old habits and all that. My mom as well, but then my grandmother became a witness around 20, right? Mm-hmm. So a very brief history of that, just to make a quick point. So my uncle was engaged. The woman cheated on him. They were both witnesses. Then he gets married. She cheated on him. They were both witnesses. My grandmother gets married, I think becomes a witness after that. Mm-hmm. And then her husband as well. Husband becomes an elder, has a whole nother family in a different state that she never knew about, ends up eventually leaving my family to go to the other family. That's what my grandfather did. But before that was emotionally and physically abusive to all three of my family members, my mother, my uncle, my grandmother. He was a witness. He was an elder. So when you think about what that means, it's not as though, I mean, this is one family, and admittedly, my family, I don't get to use just one family as an example, saying that all families are like that. Certainly not. But if it can happen to that level in one family, if there is marital dysfunction in one family to that extent, not to mention that my mother couldn't even find somebody to marry because it can be tough depending on where you're located, and there's a finite amount of brothers that are eligible for marriage and all of that kind of baloney. And so she ended up leaving the organization looking for a partner because she'd always wanted to get married. So any way you look at it, and of course she went right back after that, is the end of that story. But any way you look at it, it didn't work out very well. And so these things do happen. I just wanted to reinforce that. They absolutely do happen. Are they prevalent? Not necessarily. Who's to say? But it certainly can happen. And I'll tell you, it would happen a lot less, I think, if they didn't push the superiority complex. Because ironically, even after my grandfather died, people who knew him said, "Oh, he was such a good brother." No, he wasn't. It was terrible. They just didn't know anything about it. So, and that's all because my grandmother wasn't allowed to speak on it. So,
Yeah.
moral of the story.
It's I'm sorry that happened. It's a terrible story, but it's as you say, it's the level of brainwashing and indoctrination that we're seeing here that causes things like that. It's when clearly terrible things have happened there, and your grandmother's not even allowed to talk about it. She has to keep it to herself, has to bottle all of that up, all of that emotional distress. So that it doesn't look bad to everybody else, doesn't look bad in public. It's and that's what it boils down to with this organisation, time and time again, is the public image. Mm-hmm. Let's just look to be perfect. Let's, don't let anyone else looking in from outside see that we're not perfect. We have to be better than everyone else. And you see that from the very small interaction that most people have with Jehovah's Witnesses, which is these nicely dressed, polite, kind, loving people that come and knock on your door on a Saturday morning. Mm-hmm. The majority of people, when they hear about Jehovah's Witnesses, that's what they know of Jehovah's Witnesses. They don't see all of the emotional distress, all of the emotional baggage, all of the indoctrination that has happened to these people. And it's not the fault of those who are Jehovah's Witnesses. Obviously, on a whole, Jehovah's Witnesses are nice, loving, kind people. But they're that loving, they're that kind, they're that nice, that they buy into all of this bullshit, and they become victims to a greedy, self-centered organisation, such as, the Watchtower organisation.
Mm-hmm. And that made me think that there was an undertone in this episode where it ended there, or where we paused it, saying, is your marriage, etc. Well, if there's something wrong with your marriage, we'll tell you what you need to do. You need to rely on Jehovah. You know what relying on Jehovah means? It means listening to his organization. You know what that means? Do what we say. The trail of breadcrumbs will always lead back there. Because in all of these episodes, it's, make sure you lean on Jehovah, which really means the organization, which really means do everything we tell you. It's always that chain of events, no matter what the subject is. Also, this is just a side note, but, they're certainly not going to say, you should see a marriage counselor. You should talk to a professional if you're having serious issues in your marriage. They're not going to say something like that. They're not going to, ask you to talk to each other about who should, bear the burden of responsibility in certain things in the marriage. They're going to tell you this is how it should be. And if it's not this way, then that's not scriptural marriage. So,
yeah. Right, shall we move on and we'll watch these couple of videos that that they made to go along with this.
Let's do it.
Because they've worked for Jehovah's people in the past. In the following dramatization, notice what wives and husbands can learn from the example of Sarah.
Pioneering where the need is greater wasn't easy. After a long day in service, I had a part to work on. Thankfully, Jess took care of everything so I could focus on my part. She's the best. Poor thing. She was exhausted. Good thing we were turning in early.
William and I couldn't agree on much lately. We couldn't afford this. There had to be something cheaper. But he wouldn't listen. Sometimes, I feel my husband doesn't make the best decisions. I just wish he'd value my suggestions. Frankly, I've given up trying.
Themselves to their husbands, just as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. Hebrews chapter 11 and Isaiah chapter 51 also cite Sarah as a fine example for Christian wives. But Christian husbands can also learn much from carefully examining.
Sarah's example for me. Sarah was willing to move to parts unknown. A life fraught with danger and hardship. She unselfishly supported Abraham, no matter what. Just like my Jessica. She does without, never complains. What a gem. I can do better, letting her know just how precious she is to me.
Sarah submissively obeyed her husband. But she also spoke up. She loved her son, and she knew what was at stake: God's promises through Isaac. Even though she knew it would upset Abraham, she spoke up. She must have thought carefully before speaking to him. After all, she called him Lord. Jehovah blessed her for her loyal support of Abraham, even reminding him to listen to her. I knew I couldn't expect Jehovah to whisper in my husband's ear. But did my speech show respect, like Sarah? I needed to tell him how I felt, but I needed to do it the right way. That night, we spoke. And little by little, things started to improve. Imitating Sarah really worked.
In our next video, we'll get to know Claudius Johnson.
Yes, so the story of Sarah and how we should imitate Sarah. These videos seem to get weirder and weirder each time they bring one out. It's like, I mean, if you want to talk about cherry picking from the Bible, this is a clear case of just cherry picking, throwing out what doesn't fit with your narrative, and just honing in on the bit that goes with your narrative. Because the whole story of Sarah, like if you read Genesis, they're trying to say here that Sarah was respectful of Abraham, and that Abraham loved Sarah in return. Sarah was whored out by Abraham multiple times in the story. He had multiple wives because she was barren in the early days. So, she tells him to go and, her and God tell Abraham to go and, start having sex with all the maidservants. And then she gets prideful when she has a child. She gets prideful and gives more attention to her child than to his other children. In fact, telling Abraham that he needs to go and banish his other children from the camp, because how dare they expect to have more than her child has.
And isn't this supposed to be a God that's impartial?
Well, supposedly. He's also supposed to be against polygamy, but obviously that's not the case in Genesis. But
depends on the creative day, doesn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, gosh, I don't even know. I'm fortunate that I've forgotten the details of some of these stories. But as I was telling you backstage, I couldn't make it through Genesis. I decided to try to read the Bible again last year when I had started officially, truly waking up. And I had a moment of wondering if it was all true. And I said, well, to figure it out, I'm going to read the Bible. And I started with Genesis. I couldn't make it through Genesis. It's a terrible book. There's all kinds of terrible things that go on, like the stuff that you just mentioned. And so I think to myself, I don't see why. I mean, why do you have to tie it into the Bible like that? You're assuming that these things really happened. Their whole religion is based on that assumption. You're trimming away the fat of the things that wouldn't go with the point you're trying to get across. You're leaving out all of the inconvenient truths, and then you're saying, oh, just be like Sarah and your marriage will be great. I mean, which part do you which part do you want them to replicate exactly? I mean, come on. And then of course how it ends, or actually even before that video, the whole camera thing. Oh, I told him not to buy it or whatever. Just this strange level of discord and dysfunction that they portray in these marriages. Even before, I didn't mention it at the time, but the third example they gave of, oh, when you're looking for when you're lost, and the subject of asking for directions comes up. I mean, do these things really happen? Because first of all, we're living in an age where you have GPS. Whose phone is dying that you can't get directions from your phone? And even with all that, they they create these images of, like I said, discord and dysfunction that just aren't realistic. They just aren't. Has it happened? Sure. But I've been very close to many people who were married, close enough to know the inner workings of their marriage, and haven't heard of any blow-ups over driving directions or blow-ups over money spent on cameras and things like that. Finances sure cause a reason for argument in some cases, but that's again why if you sit down, I mean, it seems to me like a case of the man thinking he can do whatever he wants to do. And here comes the woman with an opinion, and it's all about her timing the opinion right and making sure that she says it in a respectful way, because of course that's what a man emphasizes the most. I completely disagree with that, by the way.
There was a line there at the end, wasn't there, where she said, I was right to tell him not to buy the camera, but I needed to phrase it in a more respectful manner. I was like, what that is just not something that an adult should ever be having to say. In any situation, I just need to be more respectful in how I, well, unless obviously you have been, completely disrespectful and, in general, in a general sense. But, nothing that she was saying should be wrong for a wife to be saying to her, if it's meant to be a true partnership.
Exactly.
She shouldn't have to refrain from saying, or find a more respectful way of saying, no, we can't afford that. What are you doing? Why are you buying that? We can't afford it. That's yeah. Go ahead.
It suggests that the man is not coming to her first and saying, "Hey, honey, I was thinking about buying this. How do you feel?" And so that's part of this sort of fantasy that they have apparently of dysfunctional marriages. Again, does it happen? Sure, but you're taking what must be a small sample size, and you're portraying it as though it's inevitable. And oh, let's troubleshoot this with some extra subjection, as long as the woman is being respectful. Then, rather than, I mean, if you want to take it that way, then let's have the conversation about how to manage money and all that. But that's not what it's about. It's about the women being respectful to the husbands. I just, everything about the way they spin it, I just hate that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what it is. It's all the way they spin it. I mean, being respectful and being loving, they're two staples of any sort of relationship. If you should, if you're in a marriage, you should love your partner and you should be respectful to your partner. But that works both ways. But they spin it in a way so it's just, we'll now split the respectfulness and we'll split the lovingness, and one partner has to be loving, the other person has to be respectful. Again, it's these roles that are set out in the Bible, and then making people fit into the stereotypes that the Bible has set out. So we'll just stereotype women this way, we'll stereotype men that way, and if you're not acting like the brother in this video and you're not acting like the woman in this video, then you're doing something wrong as a wife, or you're doing something wrong as a husband. And that's not a way to to promote like diversity and open-mindedness and things like that within. In some senses, it's taking respectfulness away from marriages, and it's taking lovingness away from marriages by forcing people into stereotypes that majority of people aren't going to want to sit in.
Absolutely. And I along the lines of what you said about roles set out in the Bible, and I saw Kat mentioned it as well, which is, of course, very true. All of that starts with the idea that God created man first and women second, and women only as a complement to the man, and that they're the weaker vessel. So even from the very beginning, it's already not starting off on solid footing.
Yeah, exactly. I'm not sure how much longer you've got, because you said you only had a short amount of time tonight.
Since we started at, so I'm in Central Time, so I have plenty of time left, about on top of the hour. I'll have to get off, I believe.
All right, that's sound. We'll continue on then. I like this next video. It's very melodramatic for the story that he's telling. But anyway, we'll listen to this this guy's story. If I can find, there we go, a screen share.
Even though his wife died over 20 years ago, I think you'll see from his interview that his spiritual qualities and focus on kingdom interest enhanced his over 4 decades of marriage.
Prayer is an important thing. Everything I do, I always go to Jehovah in prayer and ask for his guidance. I was born on the 26th of March, 1923, in Panama. I was baptized on August 1946 at Cleveland, Ohio. I started pioneering in January of 1947. Well, there are a couple of scriptures that have been most influential in my life. One in Psalm 55:22, which says, "Throw your burden on Jehovah, and he will sustain you. Never will he allow the righteous one to fall." One of the most trying experiences of my life was facing the Selective Service Board. I registered as was required by law, and I received a classification of 1A, fit for military service. I then spoke with the Society's legal department, and I was instructed to appeal the decision because I was a regular pioneer. I had to go to the draft board, and there I was severely questioned. One of the problems they had was that I had a part-time job, and they felt that that interfered with my being classified as a full-time minister. However, because I was conducting about 12 Bible studies at that time, I took copies of all those records and presented it to the board. The chairman said to me, "Are you saying if we were to talk to all of these people, they would tell us that you're conducting Bible study with them every week?" And I said, "Yes, sir." While they are deliberating, I am praying hard to Jehovah help them to make a proper decision. In a few days' time, the classification card came as 4D. I was classified as a religious minister. And I lift my thought to Jehovah and thank you, Jehovah, very much. And when I was in the circuit work in Cuba, I had a few encounters with soldiers. It's difficult to understand the tense atmosphere that existed back in those days, the freedom that those rebels had with shooting people and even Batista's people. They didn't have a second thought. I had just got through serving a congregation in the hills, and we took the local bus that ran around that area, and on the highway, 2 soldiers stopped the bus and ordered all men to come off. They started looking at each of us one by one, sending everybody back on the bus, and they looked at me and said, "You, stay there," pointed the rifle at me and said, "Who are you?" And I explained myself. but they kept pointing the rifle. One of the soldiers said to the driver, "Take off." But that's when you pray hard. And you remember the scripture, Proverbs 29:25. Trembling at men is a snare, but the one trusting in Jehovah will be protected. So the driver said, "No, he's a circuit overseer. He rides with me all the while." And he really defended me and makes me believe that Jehovah's angels intervene. And that's why I say I am a slave to prayer. It's the most important thing in my life. When I came back to the United States, I was being used by the service department in the full-time work. A few years later, I had to give up the full-time work and take care of my family. The adjustment I had to make as a family man was hard because most of my life was occupied in full-time service. But I had to leave matters in Jehovah's hands. We started the prison ministry around May of 1974. It gives you a measure of satisfaction in seeing how the Bible has a very strong influence on individuals. To see criminals turn their life completely around, the Bible changes lives. And that's why pioneering has always been in my heart. And so after my wife died, I felt that the proper thing to do was to get back into the full-time service. And as a result of that, I started pioneering again in 1998. Jehovah God has been good to me. And at my age of 96, I thank Jehovah every day for the health and strength He permits me to enjoy, and I keep on going.
Yeah, so a little bit of a change of subject. Now we're back onto the onto prayer and how effective prayer is, and how if you pray to Jehovah, then angels will come down and fix all of your problems and make you live a long, happy life. I love the way that, you know, the Watchtower have this knack of picking certain people and certain stories, which, on a whole, when you look at the stories, they are boring as hell. There's no substance there, there's no drama there, but they paint it to be so melodramatic and so powerful, you know, that it just perfectly fits their narrative, fits what they're trying to say. And I mean, I suppose at some point when he was in Havana, he had a gun held to his head. Yeah, okay, quite dramatic, but the way he's phrasing it is, I pray to Jehovah before every action that I make in my life. And I just know that Jehovah answers all of my prayers. I mean, that's an illogical statement to make after the first statement that he's made, because how is he testing as to whether it's actually God that's been answering his prayers or not? If he prays before everything he does. And if he prays before everything he does, and he was dragged into this office with these angry men trying to make him go on to into service for the army, and then he's got a gun held to his head, and then he's and then he's taken away from there and has to do all these other things. How does he know that all of those bad things weren't answers to his prayers as well? It sounds to me like he's counting the hits and ignoring all the misses, which is what we see all the time in prayer. It's, I'll pray for everything, and every time it happens, oh, wow, look, oh, Jehovah, help me here. It's just, it's ridiculous, way of thinking, but obviously completely cherry-picked by the organisation here.
Mm-hmm. What frustrates... Sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I was just going to say, you never hear in these stories. You never hear of all those Jehovah's Witnesses who have prayed for things to happen, who've prayed so hard that their child does not die, in their arms, and yet their child dies in their arms. Who pray that, that the child is born healthy, and yet the child is born with cancer and deformations. You never hear of those who were in prison and prayed that they would not be executed, and yet they were executed. Mm-hmm. You never hear of those stories. You only ever hear of these. Oh, look how I was in this terrible situation where someone was trying to make me do something I didn't want to do, and someone was singing something I didn't want to hear, and look, Jehovah answered my prayers and fixed this problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's exactly what I was going to touch on, that I think it's frankly disrespectful to allege that all of your prayers have been answered when there's all of these terrible things that have gone on, that have happened, that people prayed for, witnesses prayed for those things to not happen or to turn out differently. And what difference did it make? A friend of mine, who actually I'm going to be having on the podcast, he was raised as a Adventist, and Adventists teach the same stuff. You just pray and God will answer your prayers. And so he is he's an atheist now, and he's gay, and he struggled with his orientation growing up, and he prayed for guidance on that. Guidance came. He prayed for God to show him a sign, because he truly believes and he wanted it to be true. And he prayed for a sign. Hey, please show me that you're out there. Nothing came. I personally prayed, please show me a sign if you're out there, before I become atheist. Nothing happened. But oh good, as long as this gentleman, who seems to have perfectly good intentions, but as long as this gentleman has all of his answers coming through, that's all that really matters. And then Watchtower will snatch that and put that on the big screen. I mean, it's preposterous. And as I said, I think it's disrespectful to the people who have experienced tragedy, and that thankfully as of yet doesn't apply to me. But people who have experienced real tragedy, and they had prayed to avoid that tragedy, and that didn't happen. It didn't turn out that way. They have to live with that now. But as long as this person gets everything he asked for, please. And also, didn't his wife die young, or at least compared to him?
Yeah, I think so. I think that was in the story, yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, were you not praying for good health for your family members? I mean, at what point does that fall apart? Especially at his age. You're bound to see things fall apart.
Yeah, but he doesn't count any of that, because he's counting the hits, ignoring the misses. That's simply what he's doing, If it doesn't, if his prayers aren't answered the way he wants, then it was just God's will. That didn't want that to happen. The child dies in your arms. Oh well, that's God's will. That's
a resurrection.
Yeah, they'll be resurrected. It's all right. It's absolute bullshit in my opinion, and just ridiculous. And you think about all those people that are sat there right now listening to this in in the congregations of Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're sat there watching this, and they have had these tragedies happen. The prayers have not been answered the way that they wanted it to to be answered, and think about how much of a guilt trip that will be to them, how inadequate they will feel. When he's saying things, and this happens every time they mention prayer in these videos. They say things like, well, if you put your life into service to Jehovah, you do everything for Jehovah, Jehovah will answer your prayers. And look, it happened for this guy here, and it happened for that sister there. Yeah, they put their lives to Jehovah, and Jehovah answered their prayers. What about all those Jehovah's Witnesses that didn't have their prayers answered, that these tragedies happened to? How are they feeling? How does that make them feel? It makes them feel like they are not doing enough. So it comes back round to the same old rhetoric that Jehovah's Witness, that the Watchtower organisation is pushing on Jehovah's Witnesses, which is do more, listen more, obey more, do more. Because if you're not doing enough, then your prayers aren't going to be answered. If you're not doing enough, then bad things will happen to you. And it's a nasty spiral of guilt tripping and tragedy. And to be fair, I feel sorry for all of these Jehovah's Witnesses that are trapped inside that hurricane of an organisation, where they don't even realise a lot of the time that they are trapped inside a dogmatic, shitty organisation. That they are victims, to these greedy men sat in America.
It's no great wonder that so many people, even that I've known, had, including my own mother, had depression and anxiety. Because when you're sitting, listening to what you just said, made me think back to when I would pray, and if I didn't get answers, mind you, I was not praying about anything all that important, but I was praying with the expectation that if I was doing everything I should be doing, if I was, for example, working in harmony with my prayers, that God would answer them. So when no answer came, I absolutely internalized that, made it about me. And I've known a lot of people who have done that. And even outside of prayer, the reliance on God for anything good to happen, if they deserve it. I knew a lot of people that would, they'll say, "Oh, I'll see you tomorrow, Jehovah willing." What does that even mean, honestly? But when bad things happen to people like them, one person in particular that I'm thinking of, they took it harder, and I can't help but now wonder if it was because of their reliance on anything good coming from God, and if they didn't get something good, it's because they didn't deserve it. That's got to be tough.
And then there's also another point as well, obviously, from this video, which, they don't touch on it very often in these videos, but that's the prison ministry. And he mentioned there about the prison ministry and, how, it's great to go and bring these lost souls into the, into the truth, into the organisation, and show them a better life and everything. But isn't that just it's just one of the other ways that they prey on people who are in a bad place in life? People who've fucked up for whatever reason. They've fucked up, they've ended up in prison, they're not in a very good place where where they can be happy. So they're usually sad because obviously they are in prison, and for whatever reason they're trying to make themselves better. They're trying to amalgamate back into society again once they leave prison. And yet here comes along these Jehovah's Witnesses who have them as a captive audience, quite literally, and then shove all of this down their freaking throat and say, "Oh, well, we can make you better. Our God can make you into a nice, loving person." And then they're recruiting these people into the thing, but then they're not even vetting the people that they're bringing in. They'll just bring anybody in. So sometimes they're bringing in, hardened criminals, people who aren't going to change. But because they're studying the Bible, then the prison service goes easy on them and lets them out early. And then this is like just adding to the ranks of the criminal element of Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, they're not vetting whether or not the person that they're teaching the Bible to and giving this get-out-of-jail-free card to, they're not vetting whether that person was a child sex abuser or something, how many times they've been in and out of prison and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then they're bringing them into an organisation that just is not capable of protecting its children in the first place.
Well, and how sad for the people behind bars who, in many cases, as I've heard from people who spent time in prison, don't have hope. It's a hard life. I mean, I know a guy that he's rough. He's a tough guy. And if I always tell him, if I ever need security, I'm coming to you. He's that kind of guy. He's just a wall. But you get him talking about prison, and he is the most delicate, vulnerable person. I mean, when he talks about that, he says, he says he'd rather die than go back. So here you have people who, like you said, are not in a good place. And you bring along not just cult indoctrination, but from the perspective of the prisoner, you bring along hope. Hope that you can't deliver on. That's the part that really bothers me, because for all, I don't know how you feel about it, but I feel like I was sold a dream, and then I woke up to reality, and not almost nothing. Almost nothing was the same. And so how sad that these people are given a glimpse of hope that cannot be delivered on. And some of them don't get out of jail too. Some of them end up dying in there, thinking that they're going to be in a better place. Which I guess in that situation, it's not terrible that they had some hope before the end, but overall, just what a terrible machine. And that's ultimately, it brings us all back to that prayer piece too, in a way. It's about giving people hope, and you can't deliver.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's what it's all about, isn't it? If you shouldn't, I mean, you shouldn't be, preying on people which are in bad places in their life. I mean, I understand it's a good way of gaining more followers, but it's, you're not helping those people. I mean, and it's not just prisoners that they do this to. They go around, reading the obituary pages, trying to find family members that have just lost thing. They go around the maternity wards where looking for people who've just lost their babies in, through miscarriages and things like that. It's, this is not a very honest way to go about gaining followers if it truly is the truth.
Mm-hmm.
There's an element of, as you say, that they're providing a hope that they can't deliver on, and sometimes it sort of seems like they know that they can't deliver on it. So they're pushing these areas where it doesn't matter if they can't deliver on it. The hope itself is enough to bring people round.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, we're coming up to the on the hour, and we've been going for about an hour and a half. So I think it's probably a good place to end the show. We've covered some good stuff, and I hope it's been useful information for the viewers. Thank you very much for coming on, Jared.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
It's always lovely having you here. I love our conversations together. It's and you're doing some really good stuff online yourself now. So as I said at the beginning, I really do look forward to the airing of your first shows. That'll be something to look forward to, definitely.
I appreciate that. I'm just trying to get like you. That's all I can hope for.
It's a hard road, but it's rewarding though. It's it's a good experience, and yeah. So thank you for everyone that's been watching. If you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. It's all I always love getting new subscribers and new support as well. If you want to support the channel, www.bogskeptic.co.uk. You can find links to my Patreon and my merch store and everything there. And I'll be back on Friday with another episode of my calling show, the 01 Show. Be back on with Scott Williamson, so please tune in for that. And as always, please remember, ignorance is never bliss. Thank you, and good night.
with the stink of decay. Stamped down under boots of the company. Slave spirit, propagate and obey. Trust up in the hog ties of industry. Live to produce and produce to consume. It's all you know now. Suffering none as you breathe in the fumes. Still here they go, selling you the sky and the stars. Always gotta push it too far. Ain't no profit in my pride. You can't put a price on me. Selling you the sky and the stars. Revenue is all that you are. Ain't no profit in my pride. You can't put a price on living free. A little touch of hope, a little touch of hope goes a long way. Spreading color as we glide upon the grace. A little touch of hope, a little touch of hope goes a long way. Time to hang away your shackles, claim your dues, yeah. It's payday. Get the pick of the pond. Little minnows are crushed into caviar. Great beckons with the perks of the cone. Fast gamble in the smoke of a fat cigar. Live to produce and produce to consume. Feed the supply now. Suffering none as you breathe in the fumes. Believe the lies, selling you the sky and the stars. Always gotta push it too far. Ain't no profit in my pride. You can't put a price on me. Selling you the sky and the stars. Revenue is all that you are. Ain't no profit in my pride. You can't put a price on living free. A little touch of hope, a little touch of hope goes a long way. Spreading color as we glide upon the grace. A little touch of hope, a little touch of hope goes a long way. Turn to hack away your shackles, claim your dues, yeah. It's paid.